Okay, so I know you've spent a lot of time, as a philosopher thinking about aesthetics and all the different theories out there.
Oh, many.
But have you ever thought about how existentialism, like a philosophy that really focuses on just existing and freedom and the individual, like how that shapes our understanding of like art?
Yes.
So you sent us this super detailed entry on existentialist aesthetics from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And it's clear you're looking for like a seriously deep understanding of this.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how,
So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to take a deep dive into existentialist aesthetics. It's where philosophy and art like really come together.
yeah, it's kind of unique in a way.
So our goal here is to break down the main ideas, especially the those metaphysical and phenomenological roots, and to show you its really unique perspective on art and like what it means to be human, hopefully in a way that even you, a philosopher, would appreciate.
And concisely, of course.
Concisely, of course. So the big question we're exploring, the real heart of the matter, is this. How does existentialism, with its focus on existence and freedom, shape its view of art? And from your perspective as a philosopher, someone who knows their way around aesthetics, how does this compare to other theories you've come across?
Well, I think what's so interesting here is that existentialist aesthetics isn't just like a random collection of artistic tastes. It comes directly from a very specific way of seeing the world.
Oh, okay.
The key idea, and this is something that even thinkers who disagree on a lot of things can agree on, is that human freedom is radical.
Yeah.
And it's like built into our very being. We're not just free to make choices within a set system.
Right.
It's more like freedom is the core of who we are, even before we start thinking about ethics or politics.
So before any of that stuff, existentialism says freedom is like the foundation of how we interact with the world.
Exactly. And the source material makes a really interesting distinction between Christian and atheistic existentialism, which is important here.
Oh, that is interesting. So how does that play out?
So for a Christian existentialist like Gabriel Marcel, this metaphysical freedom is all about our ability and, I guess, our duty to be open to the mystery of creation.
Okay.
It's about being ready to respond to what he calls the thou, this divine presence behind everything. It's like a radical openness to something beyond our immediate understanding.
Almost like we're being invited to take part in a bigger cosmic story.
I think that's a really insightful way to put it. Then you have the atheistic existentialists like Camus, Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Merleau-Ponty. They don't have that foundation of divine order. So for them, freedom can feel less like an invitation and more like, well, a burden.
Right.
They don't have that reassurance that their efforts to find meaning will line up with some objective truth. So it's a freedom experience with a real sense of, I guess, uncertainty.
Right. Like you're kind of on your own to figure it out.
Exactly. It's this challenge of embracing freedom without any external validation or inherent purpose. But here's the thing. Whether they're Christian or atheist, they all agree that freedom is the basis of how we connect with the world and reveal things about reality that we wouldn't see otherwise.
Okay, so freedom is the foundation. The source material then goes into the phenomenological core of existentialist aesthetics. Now, you're a philosopher who knows Husserl. Can you explain how phenomenology inspired this?
Well, existentialism takes the phenomenological method and puts its own spin on it, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
Phenomenology, as Husserl described it, is the study of consciousness and how it intends objects. So intentionality means our consciousness is always directed at something.
Right.
We're not just aware in a vacuum. We're always conscious of something, a perception, an emotion, a judgment.
So it's not just that I see a tree, but my consciousness is actively focused on that specific tree.
Exactly. And Husserl showed that the meaning we get from something depends on how our consciousness intends it, on the structure and temporality of our conscious acts. Think about seeing an object in space.
Okay.
It's not a static picture. We see it from different angles over time. Our memory fills in the blanks, and we kind of anticipate future encounters with it. This temporal structure is part of how we understand the object.
So it's not just a simple mechanical process of seeing.
Right. And then Sartre, in What is Literature, takes this idea of human consciousness as a revealer and emphasizes how just being in the world creates more relationships that make up meaning. He uses a great example. We're the ones who connect a tree to the sky, who see a dead star, the moon, and a river as a single landscape.
Oh, I like that.
Our actions, our intentionality, they actively shape the world and bring out new aspects of being.
So we're not just passively absorbing information, we're actively creating meaning in the world.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where the existentialists really go beyond traditional phenomenology. They say intentionality isn't just about how we know the world, the epistemological part, but it's also essential to who we are, the metaphysical part. This lets them move past those classic dualisms, like subject-object and freedom-determinism. If meaning comes from consciousness, then we're actively shaping reality.
Right.
But the world isn't just a blank canvas. It already has potential meanings, either as possibilities for us to act on, like Sartre believed, or as meanings already present in the world, like Merleau-Ponty and Marcel thought.
So it's this back and forth, this constant interaction between what we do and what the world shows us. Okay, so how does this all connect to their understanding of art?
Well, if our consciousness can bring order and meaning to the world, then art becomes this deliberate and conscious way of using that power.
Okay.
Unlike our everyday lives, where we often do this without thinking, art makes this ordering process more formal, more intense, and intentional.
So artists are doing the same thing we all do, creating meaning, but they're more aware of it and have an artistic goal in mind.
Exactly. And by doing this, art reveals important aspects of the world, showing them to us in a new light through the artist's perspective. But it also makes us, both as artists and viewers, aware of ourselves as the ones doing the revealing, the ones manifesting the world. Sartre talked about this double joy of both revealing the world and realizing we're free to do so.
So it's like we get pleasure not just from seeing, but from understanding what we see.
Yes, and he calls this a metaphysical aesthetic pleasure because it comes from that fundamental relationship between us and the world.
Okay.
And this freedom is so powerful that every time art reveals something about the world, it's pointing towards the totality of being. Even a small, focused artwork hints at a much bigger picture. This is something Simone de Beauvoir explored with her idea of the metaphysical novel, a type of literature that deals directly with these big questions of existence.
This explains why the existentialists thought so highly of certain artists, often putting them on the same level as philosophers. They had people like Camus with Dostoevsky, Marcel with Bach, Merleau-Ponty with Cézanne, and Sartre with de Beauvoir, Faulkner, and Kafka.
What's interesting is that they saw both philosophy and art as having the same goal: to show people their own freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. They're like two different but complementary ways of dealing with what it means to be human.
Now, we've talked about art as a way of showing us the world, but the source also talks about art as an expression of freedom, which brings in ethics. How are those two connected?
This connection between metaphysical and ethical freedom is a key part of how existentialism differs from traditional phenomenology. Existentialists say that our ability to reveal the world is tied to our duty to decide who we should be, what values should guide us. Since we don't have a preset essence, we're condemned to be free, as the saying goes. This freedom isn't just about external limits, it's about our power to determine who we are. And with that power comes responsibility. That's where engagement comes in.
Engagement, that active commitment to using our freedom in the world and owning our choices.
Exactly. And they argue that how we intend the world, the meaning we give it, is shaped by our values and the things that define us. Like a mountain climber and a scholar will see the same mountain differently because their values and goals are different. Even the experience of being, as Marcel said, comes from a desire for it, a need for it.
So every time we reveal something about the world, we're also showing our own values and who we are.
Precisely. And this brings us back to art, because art takes this natural human ability and makes it more intentional and self-aware. It helps us understand our ethical responsibility better. Every time art shows us the world in a certain way, it's also subtly suggesting how we could use our freedom.
Which goes back to Sartre's definition of art as an imaginary presentation of the world inasmuch as it requires human freedom. It's not just showing us the world, but is asking us to engage with it freely.
Exactly. Art, in this view, is about making us feel essential in relation to the world. It's not passive, it's a call to action. It involves the artist's freedom to make creative choices, and the audience's freedom to engage with the world the art shows us, and maybe even imagine ways to change it. This focus on ethics and politics is why they often preferred art that depicted the world, and were skeptical of purely abstract art.
Because for them, art wasn't just about being new and different. It was about facing the big questions of life and our responsibility to the world. The source also talks about art and the absurd, another big part of existentialism.
Right, and this is where we see a split between what you might call optimistic and tragic views of existence within existentialism. Thinkers like Marcel and Merleau-Ponty were more optimistic, seeing the world as open to human understanding and action, often finding meaning in their beliefs or the nature of being human. but Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus were more tragic, emphasizing how the world resists our desire for meaning and unity.
And this resistance, this clash between our desire for meaning and the world's indifference, is what Camus called the absurd.
Exactly. For Camus, the world is chaotic and random, and our efforts to make sense of it will always hit a wall. The absurd is both a condition of the world and the futility of trying to impose meaning on it.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that Camus wasn't being totally pessimistic. He also found meaning in the beauty of nature, like the landscapes in Nuptials or the sensory moments in The Stranger. There's a sense of freedom in accepting the lack of inherent meaning and living in the present moment.
Like finding joy in knowing that nothing really matters.
In a way, yes. Sartre, though, focused more on the negative, the nauseating aspects of a meaningless world. Nausea is all about this feeling of unease, where even ordinary things become strange and repulsive.
Right.
But even in nausea, there are moments of escape through art, like when the main character hears a jazz song. It offers a temporary glimpse of something different.
So even when they're talking about the absurd, art can offer a way out or a deeper way to face meaninglessness. Now, let's look at how they understood the artwork itself. What did they think art actually is?
Sartre, in his early work on imagination, had some great ideas about this. He said that our ability to imagine, to think of something as both present and absent, as virtual, shows our freedom most clearly. This derealizing power of imagination is key to understanding art. For Sartre, the physical parts of art, like the paint or the words, aren't the main focus of judgment. Instead, we judge the virtual object, the ideal qualities, the meaning, the power, and the beauty that the work shows us.
So the physical artwork is more like a trigger for this virtual object.
Exactly. But Sartre wasn't saying there's a separate world of ideals. It's more like the real artwork has both a physical and a virtual dimension, and they're inseparable.
Okay.
Merleau-Ponty had a similar idea, saying that the ideal content is in transparency behind the sensible or in the heart of the sensible. It's like the meaning shines through the physical form.
So the artwork's meaning isn't just in the materials, but in how they come together.
Right, and they emphasize the unity that art creates. But Sartre's analysis of how the parts of an artwork relate is really interesting. He says each part gets its meaning from its relationship to the other parts, through negation or difference. It's similar to Sautre's idea of language, where meaning comes from the differences between words.
So a word in a text means something because it's not other words, and a color in a painting has its effect because of the other colors around it.
Exactly. And this means that the meaning and power of art often comes from what's not there, the silences and omissions, just as much as what is there. Sartre famously said that literature is never fully realized in language itself. It's about the silences, the things that words can't fully express.
That's a powerful image, art as a kind of meaningful silence. So how does this connect to their theory of how art is created?
This derealizing power of consciousness, our ability to imagine and create worlds, is what defends the artist's freedom. Art becomes a prime example of freedom in action, the power to take the world and reshape it. Camus said, "To write is already to choose."
So the act of making art is already an act of freedom.
Absolutely. And while they knew there were limits to what artists could do, both internal and external, their theory celebrated the artist's freedom. They saw art as a way to face the ambiguity of human freedom, that tension between our limitless consciousness and our specific circumstances.
That tension between being totally free in our minds but also bound by our situation.
Exactly. Merleau-Ponty, in his later work, had a nuanced theory of expression that delves into this. He used literature to show how writers make new meanings, even new language, by creatively using the language they share with others. It's both individual and communal.
Okay.
He took Husserl's metaphor of perspective and argued that the artist's unique perspective creates a new order and meaning where there wasn't one before.
So style isn't just decoration, it's how the artist creates meaning.
Exactly. Style becomes a fundamental way of seeing the world, a unique way of being. It doesn't just express existing meaning, it creates new meaning. Camus agreed, saying that unity in art comes from the artist's transformation of reality through their use of language and elements.
Which relates to Merleau-Ponty's ideas of speaking speech and spoken speech. True art is both new and built from shared elements, so it's also communication.
Right. While some modern art movements rejected traditional language, existentialist aesthetics emphasize the communicative side of art, how it connects personal expression with shared understanding. But here's the tension again. Can art have lasting meaning across time when it's rooted in a specific context? Merleau-Ponty saw continuity in art history, a possibility for understanding across time, while Sartre focused on art's connection to its time and place.
That back and forth between art's universal potential and its historical context is really interesting. What about the artists themselves? What's their role in this?
Artists have a special place because their work is seen as a powerful way to face the paradoxical nature of being human and the absurdity of existence. Camus even saw art as one of the key ways to confront the absurd, a source of affirmation and joy. Many existentialist writers saw their own lives and choices as tied to their philosophy. Marcel's Metaphysical Diary is a great example of this.
So for them, the personal and the philosophical were deeply connected.
Absolutely. They saw the lives and choices of great artists as deeply meaningful, from their decision to become artists to how their work developed. Artists are powerful examples of existential choices and the need for expression, creating virtual worlds in their art. While everyone has the capacity for expression, artists show it in its purest and most transformative form. They create something new and meaningful from their experiences and materials.
Okay.
But there's also a sense of fatalism in art, a feeling that it's always an incomplete attempt to express everything. No art form can fully capture the complexity of the world.
A constant struggle, knowing that perfect expression might be impossible. Now, what about the audience? What's their part in this?
The audience's experience, like a lot of existentialism, is full of ambiguity. On one hand, a truly original artist creates a new way of seeing the world, and the audience has to adopt this perspective to understand the art. It's almost like the art creates its own audience. Merleau-Ponty said that real art revitalizes language and makes it new again.
So art isn't just something we receive passively, it changes how we see things.
Exactly. But the audience also plays an active role in thinking about and interpreting the art. Without the audience, the art's meaning stays mostly subjective. It becomes objective. Its meaning is fully realized only when the audience engages with it, using their own imagination and understanding. Sartre called this directed creation, where the artist relies on the audience to make the art's meaning real.
It's like a collaboration, a back and forth between the artist and the audience.
Exactly. And this connects to the negativity we talked about before. The artwork's coherence and meaning often aren't stated directly. They're in the relationships and silences.
Mm.
The audience have to interpret these clues to understand the work. Sartre even said that the audience's imagination doesn't just help us understand the art, it actually creates the beautiful object by filling in the gaps left by the artist. Both Sartre and Merleau-Ponty use the metaphor of a mirror to explain this.
Okay.
The artist experiences the art internally, and the audience reconstructs its meaning externally, but both end up with the same understanding. Art becomes communication, an echo of a subjective perspective.
A really complex relationship between the artist, the art, and the audience. The source mentions the existentialist system of the arts. How did they rank different art forms?
The existentialists, especially Merleau-Ponty later on, did tend to have a kind of ranking system for art forms, based on how well each form could achieve its purpose using its own means. And for most of them, theater was at the top.
Theater, the art form that shows us human action and interaction. That fits perfectly with their focus on situation.
Exactly. For Camus, de Beauvoir, Marcel, and Sartre, philosophy and playwriting were closely linked. Marcel even called himself a philosopher-dramatist. Sartre saw theater as the best art form because the idea of situation captures both our human condition and a key element of theater, people facing the challenges of specific situations. For Sartre, theater was the most direct way to explore the responsibility that comes with freedom.
And they had specific ideas about what made good existentialist theater. A focus on basic human situations, often conflicts of rights, avoiding psychological realism for universal themes, and using direct language in simple settings.
Yes, they wanted to create modern versions of ancient Greek drama, presenting myths for a world without traditional religion. These situations were both timeless, exploring human freedom in general, and relevant to their time, dealing with issues like individual versus collective good. Sartre saw theater as political, while Marcel saw it as metaphysical, exploring themes of salvation and hope, but both show the absurdity of life.
The novel came in second, with Dostoevsky and Kafka as models.
Right. Fiction and autobiography were seen as ways to apply their philosophy directly. Camus said, "To think is to create a world." Novels, with their ability to explore complex situations and choices over time, were seen as a great way to engage with the reader's imagination and make them think about their own freedom. It was a tool for revealing the world, both metaphysically and politically. They didn't like art for art's sake and were suspicious of movements like surrealism, preferring a new kind of classicism that focused on truth, justice, and beauty.
Okay.
They didn't want simple realism. Style should serve the deeper meaning, revealing new sense through both what's said and what's not said.
Poetry seems to have had a more complicated place in their system.
Uneasy is a good word for it. Sartre especially criticized poets for misusing language, treating it as an object in itself instead of a tool for meaning. He saw poetry as less philosophical and political compared to theater and novels. But this wasn't a universal view. Camus liked poetry, seeing its imagery as a way to show truth, and Sartre even softened his stance later on, especially with negritude poetry. Overall, though, poetry wasn't as central to them.
What about non-linguistic arts like painting and music?
They weren't as interested in those compared to language arts, partly because of Hegel's idea that language is the best way to express freedom in thought. They saw non-linguistic arts as limited by their physical form. Sartre has said that notes, colors, and forms aren't signs. They don't refer to anything outside themselves the way words do.
Okay.
Merleau-Ponty argued that all art forms work like language, but he admitted there are differences. He said painting has voices of silence, an indirect language tied to its physical nature, and its history isn't about progress, but about echoes and connections. Music was a bit ambiguous. Camus called it the art of the absurd, a triumph of the flesh, while Marcel, Sartre, and de Beauvoir all had personal connections to music. But they didn't really analyze it deeply.
It's interesting how their focus on language shaped their view of other art forms. And finally, cinema. It seems they didn't really engage with it much.
It is surprising, considering how good cinema is at showing human situations. Sartre actually liked cinema early on, seeing its potential for both form and politics. It even influenced his writing, and he wrote screenplays during the war. But after getting into phenomenology, he lost interest. He later said theater has more freedom than cinema. De Beauvoir acknowledged cinema's power but preferred novels. They also weren't fans of the Nouvelle Vague.
Okay.
Merleau-Ponty had the best analysis of cinema's link to existentialism, but even he didn't focus on it as much as theater, novels, or painting.
Maybe they just didn't have time for it, or maybe their philosophy led them elsewhere. So to sum it up for you as a philosopher, existentialist aesthetics is all about freedom and how we experience the world. They see art as a way to reveal the world and express our freedom in a world that's often absurd. They prefer art that deals with ethics and politics and have a kind of ranking system for art forms, favoring those that directly engage with freedom in human situations.
Yes, and for you, this existentialist view offers a different way to think about art. It goes beyond just form and representation to focus on the core of human existence and how we create meaning. It makes us ask not just what art is, but what it does in relation to our freedom and how we interact with the world.
So one last thing for you to think about. Given how much existentialism stresses freedom and engagement, how would they judge contemporary digital art? Think about how interactive it is, how the line between artist and audience is blurred, and the new kinds of situations it creates. Or maybe think about how the idea of bad faith, which is very existentialist, shows up in how art is made and received in today's digital world. This deep dive is just a starting point. Hopefully, it makes you think more about the connections between art, freedom, and our place in the world.